Hi class. Well, we're beginning week 6, and what we're going to do among the first items of business is to revisit the Meyers Briggs test that you went through. I don't want to call it a test, it's an assessment, a self-assessment. And now that you've completed this and hopefully have done the scoring for it, you're going to get some insights into what you just might be in terms of your own set of types under the Myers-Briggs rubric. You will see that there are 4 indicators. That is, you will be one of 4 types that then in combination become a much larger array. So where to begin with this? You don't want to go too far with this. Like I said, it's not deterministic. Some people begin to embrace this as if it were some holy grail, and it certainly isn't that any more than your astrological sign is. But in terms of where it is useful for human resource management, there is some merit, because it gets into kind of the way that you can blend teams and understand and maybe value differences in others in a good way. Certainly we can see that within our own program faculty. I can assure you we are vastly different types. Dr. Haruna is a vastly different type than me, I can tell you that from the get-go. Dr. Manganaro, likewise. Dr. Reyes, likewise. And Dr. Moment as well. We are all distinct types, but those differences in fact make for, I believe, a very strong faculty. So let's get into it in very generic ways. Sort of the first layer of this onion has to do with understanding that an introvert versus extrovert dichotomy is one of attitude, your overall attitude and approach towards things. I think most of us understand an introvert versus extrovert. Where that goes and where that comes into play will make more apparent in due course here. The intuition versus sensing deals with information gathering, the style of information gathering that one engages in. Those that are sort of, call them more scientific types, or legalistic, will look at where the evidence is and work on the basis of evidence. That tends to be a foundation within those fields. Whereas the sensing side of things is that style. The intuitive is more based upon feeling and what we might call gut feeling. One is not better than the other, but you do find that within various fields they are valued more than others, generically speaking. The thinking versus feeling is a decision-making style. Again, decision-making based upon thinking, working through in a logical way towards a given decision. What we would call rational decision-making is the thinking side. Whereas the feeling side, again, tends to be associated with intuition, but is more kind of emotive, being influenced, shall we say, by the stories of people and making decisions on that basis. And then finally, a structure orientation is where you get into judging versus perceiving. So what does all that mean? Another way of looking at this is thinking about extroversion and introversion. Let's return to that now, kind of peel the second layer away. And this is where your energy goes. So for the extrovert, the energy is in initiation and in being expressive. So for the extrovert, you can quickly know, in essence, where they stand or who they are, because they will tell you, they will provide you on that first date the story of me. They will be gregarious, friendly, outgoing, active, a lot of energy in their social activities, and tend to be enthusiastic in their overall outlook on things. So I think we all know the type, and are very engaged, probably have a very robust Facebook page, among other things. Now for the introvert, they're more on kind of the receiving end. They absorb, they take this in. They're not putting it out, they're taking things in and absorbing and incorporating. They tend to be contained. Their relationships, in fact, are rather more intimate in nature, more reflective, and as a result tend to be quieter. So that kind of classic introvert versus extrovert, again, actually has its roots in the Myers-Briggs and in understanding people's energy, where the energy goes. Moving along into the sensing versus intuition dichotomy, so-called dichotomy. This has to do with the information and how information is processed in the minds. For those that are sensing, they tend to be, again, concrete, realistic, practical, experiential, and traditional. So they work on what they know, on what they see. Their information has to be, in essence, tangible. Whereas for the intuitive, they can work with abstracts. They tend to be imaginative, conceptual, theoretical, and original. So they're, to some extent, more artistic. They're creative types. That's how they process information. They're not necessarily rational, but nonetheless, of course, have a great deal of value in what they do. In terms of decisions, the thinking is logical, reasonable, critical, questioning, and tough. Whereas the feeling is more casual, more open-ended, more accepting, more accommodating, and more tender. So in terms of their decision-making capacities, they are very different styles. And then in terms of lifestyle, you can consider the judging as systematic, planning, very scheduled, starting early on projects, and very methodical. Whereas the perceiving are more casual, more open-ended, more spontaneous. They are prompted by pressure, and they are emergent. That is, they are focused on novelty, on what is new. Okay, so that's, again, another layer of this onion, and I'm not going to go too deep on this, so we'll go to a third. And this gets into now the combinations. So you have the ISTJ, the ESTJ, the INTP, the ENTJ, the ISTP, the ESTJ, INTJ, ENTP, ISFP, ESFJ, INFP, ENFJ, ISFJ, ESFP, INFJ, and ENFP. So those are the full array of types. And if you get into the literature, it's interesting because you'll see that there are certain Myers-Briggs types that are more common than others. And some combinations are actually relatively rare. I'll give you a clue, mine's rare. But we're all unique in our ways. And the other thing to keep in mind with this is that if you score, let's say, in the teens on one side, if you add up your I versus E and your I's in the number comes in the teens, then you're pretty firmly an introvert. If your extrovert score is in the teens, you're a strong extrovert. Now, if you're in the middle, that is, let's say a 9, 8 or whatever, then you're looking at a fair amount of balance, so you're not fully one or the other. So that makes this more complicated. It's not an either or proposition. Most of us are a mix. It is very, very rare for anybody to be all one and none of the other. So let's get into this then. So the ISTJ is what you would call the inspector. They tend to be very detail oriented. They notice things. They're good at spotting what is wrong. So in that sense, they can be good detectives, good, I suppose, Border Patrol agents. The ESTP is more the promoter and more the athletic. So they're more the jockish type, if you will. Not necessarily athletes per se, but they are active in that sense and gregarious, much as you would usually associate with jocks. The INTP is what we call the thinker, the theorizer. So they're very good at coming up with things, not necessarily that great at following through, but they're idea people. But often they don't want to talk about it. So often, unfortunately, the brilliant ideas are not acted on. They are not the ones who actually put things together. They can think of a better design, but they don't actually design it in many cases. The ENTJ is the leader, the executive. So they are a decision maker. They are good at working with people. They engage with others. And again, can often incorporate what we would associate with leadership traits. The ISTP is what we would call the analyzer, the crafter. So their strength is, again, being able to take things apart, understand how things work. And then again, in terms of, they would be often associated with, say, an engineer, a mechanic, people who are good at fixing things because they understand how things work and they can puzzle things out. They're also good at solving puzzles, if you will. The ESTJ is a supervisor, an executor. So they may not be the number one in an organization. They may not be the chief executive officer, but they might be the number 2, the executive manager. They make sure things get done. Those of you who had me in my leadership course know we talk about the face of an organization, often a leader, say the president of a university, and the number 2 person being the hatchet man, which is akin to the role of a provost at a university. So the ESTJ would be the provost figure, if you will. The INTJ are the strategists and the masterminds. So they're the ones that will often work at an executive capacity in the planning side of things. So they're good at strategic planning, they're good at coming up with master plans, they're good at long-term thinking and that long game, a long-term outcome. The ENTP are creative and inventive. So they are ad people, they are people who are creative, artistic, but they're also extroverts. So they're performers, to the extent that they're artists. They might be in the performing arts, actors and dancers and people who are expressive in that way and engage in that way. The ISFP are introverted. They are the most easygoing. They tend to be relaxed, they tend to be quiet, but in every other way, they seek to please, they go along to get along. So in that sense, they wouldn't have what we would consider to be strong leadership traits, but they're easy people to work with. They're very accommodating. They're very adaptive. They can shift with the times and with situations. The ESFJ, they're the caregiving traditionalists. So people in kind of those caregiving roles, the mothers, the caregivers, everything ranging from babysitters to home care people, nurses, people who are in those helping professions. Again, they can engage, they're gregarious, but not necessarily leaders. They take care of things. The INFP are actually the romantic dreamers, if you will. So quite quiet. They probably keep diaries. They might even write poetry. But they're very self-contained. So their work life is not all of their being. They have other aspirations and an interior life which can be very rich. The ENFJ are more the mystic visionaries. So these are people who have kind of a prophetic side to them. Again, they're forward thinking, but their interest is not in the hard, concrete, realistic, practical side of life. They are more into the harmonization of nature, seeing things in a holistic way. In many cases, you consider them kind of the hardcore, shall we say, stark raving hippies, but in the sense that they are, kind of spiritual in overall outlook. So it's that side, not the hedonistic side. The ISFJ are traditional and caring. So again, the nursing professions, they are busy going about their work in a quiet, effective way, and feel a great deal for others, even if they don't express it. ESFP, these are the dancers and performers, again, similar to what I mentioned before about the kind of romantic dreamers and visionaries. These are people that are, in many cases, rather flighty. They're interesting people. They say the darndest things, but they're a lot of fun to be around. They're partiers. The INFJ are the counselor mystics. So they're good in the counseling side of things. They can listen, they can absorb, and then feed back in a rather effective way. So the psychologists, the counselors can be very much this type. And then finally the ENFP. They're the kind of the popular champions, again, that high school quarterback hero type. They're extroverted and they're very demonstrative that way. They have a fair amount of confidence, and that can inspire others, and thus within that role they're fairly effective. But very often they also can peak early, and then they're left with, at best, becoming a color man on a sports broadcast. So, as I said, I'm not going to take this too very far. There's any number of places you could go if you want interpretations, but I'll tell you, some of them are better than others, so be very critical and very discerning if you want to get deeper into the Meyers-Briggs typologies. As I said, that's as far as I'll take it, but I think you can see where this is very useful, again, in the HR management side, where you can pair people with different traits that can in fact work well together and become more than the sum of their parts. So that's why I'm taking the time for this. I'm hoping that you'll find it useful in your own life, and I will be posting some images so that you can get some insights of this, and we'll kind of take it from there. Also, you'll notice in the week 6 folder, there is yet another assessment to do. This one is easier. It's very much a Myers-Briggs assessment. Again, quite easy. There is a scoring key for it, which I'll provide, and we can kind of go through that one as well. It's simpler to use than the Myers-Briggs, but I think it's every bit as effective. So again, one more tool for the toolbox, one more way to gain insight. And of course, as always, none of these are actually graded exercises. They're for your use, but also not only for personal insight, which is good, but also as tools that you can use if you're in an HR management capacity. There you go. Thanks very much.